The crimson dust of Cimarron territory swirled around Piper Sullivan's black boots as she stepped off the stagecoach, a tattered valise clutched in her gloved hand and rumors trailing behind her like a funeral shroud. Whispers began before her feet even touched the ground. No one needed to tell Blake Holloway who she was, the woman whose 3 husbands had died under mysterious circumstances. The so-called Black Widow of Boston had arrived in Silver Creek, and according to town gossip, death rode beside her. Blake stood on the porch of his saddle shop, arms crossed over his chest, watching as Miss Sullivan's arrival caused the expected stir among the townsfolk. It was June 1876, and the Western Territories were still wild enough that superstition held as much weight as law. At 32, Blake had seen enough of both to know that neither was infallible. That her? Millie Anderson, the gossipy wife of the general store owner, sidled up beside him. The cursed woman? Blake's jaw tightened. I believe that's Miss Sullivan, yes. 3 husbands dead. 3! And now she's here to teach our children. Millie shuddered dramatically. The school board must be desperate indeed. Blake watched as Piper straightened her spine, ignored the stares, and walked directly toward the boarding house, her chin held high despite the whispers that followed her. He had to admire her courage, if nothing else. Perhaps she simply had a streak of bad luck, he offered. Millie scoffed. Bad luck? The first one fell from a horse with a broken neck. The second drowned in a pond barely deeper than your knees. And the third? She lowered her voice to a scandalized whisper. Found dead in his bed with not a mark on him. That ain't luck, Mr. Holloway. That's a curse. Blake pushed away from the post he'd been leaning against. If you'll excuse me, Millie. I've got work to finish. Inside his shop, Blake tried to focus on the saddle he was repairing, but his thoughts kept drifting to the new arrival. Silver Creek hadn't had a proper schoolteacher in nearly 8 months, not since old Miss Winters had left to care for her ailing mother back east. The children were running wild, their education neglected. Someone had to teach them, and apparently, the school board had been desperate enough to hire a woman whose reputation preceded her like a thundercloud. 2 days later, Blake was delivering a repaired bridle to the livery when he spotted her again. Piper Sullivan stood outside the small schoolhouse, sweeping the porch with determined strokes. Her dark hair was pulled back in a simple bun, and she'd exchanged her traveling clothes for a modest blue dress. Even from a distance, he could see the tension in her shoulders as several women across the street huddled together, stealing glances in her direction. Against his better judgment, Blake found himself walking toward her. Miss Sullivan? He called out when he was close enough. She turned, wariness evident in her posture. Up close, he could see that her eyes were a striking hazel more green than brown, and that she couldn't be much older than 25. Yes? Her voice was steady, though her knuckles whitened around the broom handle. Blake Holloway, madam. I own the saddle shop down the street. He tipped his hat. Just wanted to welcome you to Silver Creek. Surprise flickered across her features before she composed herself. Thank you, Mr. Holloway. That's unexpectedly kind. Blake shifted his weight. School starts Monday? Yes. Though I'm not certain how many students will actually attend. She glanced toward the gossiping women, who quickly averted their eyes. Word travels fast about my history. Small towns have long memories and longer tongues. Blake agreed. But children need learning regardless. A small smile touched her lips. My thoughts exactly. An awkward silence stretched between them until Blake cleared his throat. Well, if you need anything, supplies, directions, anything at all, my shop's just down the way. I appreciate that, Mr. Holloway. She hesitated. Though you might want to be careful about being seen speaking with me. Seems I've developed a rather unfortunate reputation. Blake met her gaze directly. I make my own judgments about people, Miss Sullivan. Something in her expression softened, a vulnerability breaking through her careful composure. That's a rare quality these days. Before he could respond, the door to the schoolhouse opened, and Mayor Jenkins emerged, his round face pinched with concern when he spotted Blake. "Ah, Holloway. Good day." Jenkins nodded stiffly. "Miss Sullivan, I was just coming to see if you'd received the curriculum materials." "Yes, thank you, Mayor," she replied, her demeanor instantly more formal. "Well then, I'll leave you to your preparations." Jenkins shot Blake a meaningful look. "Holloway, a word?" Blake reluctantly followed the mayor a few paces away, sensing what was coming. "I'd be careful there, Blake," Jenkins said in a low voice. "That woman has a cloud hanging over her that I don't like one bit. Only reason we hired her is we're desperate for a teacher, and she was the only qualified applicant willing to come to this dusty corner of nowhere." "She seems perfectly respectable to me," Blake replied evenly. Jenkins snorted. "3 dead husbands says otherwise. Just mind yourself. Town's already talking, seeing you friendly with her." Blake's jaw tightened. "Since when do I answer to town gossip, Jenkins?" "Since never, which is exactly why I'm concerned." Jenkins sighed. "Look, your father was my friend, God rest his soul. I'd hate to see his only son mixed up with trouble. I was just being neighborly," Blake insisted, though something about Piper Sullivan had indeed caught his interest in a way no woman had in years. Jenkins shook his head. "Well, be neighborly from a distance. That's my advice." As the mayor walked away, Blake glanced back at the schoolhouse. Piper had resumed sweeping, her movements brisk and efficient, but he could see the slight slump in her shoulders. In that moment, he made a decision that would change the course of both their lives. Monday morning arrived with clear skies and a tension that hung over Silver Creek like summer heat. Blake positioned himself near the general store, pretending to examine merchandise while watching the schoolhouse across the street. As the school bell rang, he counted only 7 children entering, less than half the number that should have been there. Throughout the week, Blake made excuses to pass by the schoolhouse during lessons. Sometimes he'd hear Piper's clear voice explaining arithmetic or geography, other times the halting voices of children reading aloud. By Friday, he noted that 3 more students had joined the class, a small victory. That evening, as Blake was closing his shop, he spotted Piper walking alone, carrying a heavy stack of books. Without thinking, he crossed the street to her side. "Evening, Miss Sullivan. Those look heavy." She startled slightly. "Mr. Holloway." "Yes, I'm afraid I'm still setting up my classroom properly. Allow me." He held out his hands. After a moment's hesitation, she surrendered the stack. "Thank you. The boarding house is just— I know where Mrs. Parker's place is," he said with a smile. "Lived here all my life." They walked in silence for a few moments before Piper spoke again. "Your kindness has been noticed, you know. I've seen the looks." "Let them look," Blake said simply. "It's not that simple." She lowered her voice. "I came here hoping for a fresh start, Mr. Holloway. The last thing I want is to bring trouble to someone else." "Blake," he corrected. "And trouble finds me regularly enough without your help, Miss Sullivan." A reluctant smile curved her lips. "Piper, then." When they reached the boarding house steps, Blake handed back the books. 10 more students this week than Monday. That's progress." Surprise brightened her features. "You've been counting?" "Just happened to notice," he said, though they both knew it was more than that. "Well, thank you for noticing. And for the help with the books." Blake tipped his hat. "Good evening, Piper." As he walked away, Mrs. Parker opened the door, her expression souring when she saw Blake. He pretended not to notice, but he heard her sharp whisper to Piper. "You'd best be careful with that one, Miss Sullivan. Handsome he may be, but you don't need any more tragedy following you." Blake's steps faltered slightly. It hadn't occurred to him that Piper might be as warned about him as he was about her. Over the next few weeks, Blake found more reasons to cross paths with the schoolteacher. He repaired the schoolhouse steps, donated leather scraps for a craft project, and even gave an impromptu lesson on saddle making to her growing class. Each interaction revealed more of the woman behind the rumors: her intelligence, her patience with the children, her dry wit that emerged when she felt comfortable. By mid-July, nearly all the school-aged children in Silver Creek were attending classes, their parents' superstitions overcome by Piper's evident teaching skills and the children's enthusiastic reports about their new teacher. One sweltering afternoon, Blake was working in his shop when the door opened, bringing in a gust of hot air and Piper Sullivan. She wore a simple cream-colored dress, and her cheeks were flushed from the heat. "Miss Sullivan," he greeted her, setting aside his tools. "What brings you by?" "I need your expertise," she said, placing a leather-bound book on his workbench. "The binding is coming apart, and I thought perhaps you might know how to repair it. It's a favorite of mine." Blake examined the book, a collection of poetry by Emily Dickinson. "I can fix this. Give me a day or two." "Thank you." She lingered, fingers tracing patterns on the workbench. "The children enjoyed your saddle-making demonstration last week. Bobby Jenkins hasn't stopped talking about it." "Glad to hear it." Blake leaned against the bench. "Mayor's boy has a good head on his shoulders." Piper nodded. "He does. Most of them do, once given the chance to show it." She hesitated. "I heard something about you yesterday. At the general store." Blake stiffened. "People talk. They said you refused to make saddles for the cavalry after your brother died at Little Bighorn last year." The familiar pain squeezed Blake's chest. "Matthew was my only family. The army sent him to die for land that wasn't theirs to take." Understanding dawned in her eyes. "So you have your own reputation in town. The troublemaking saddle-maker with Indian sympathies," Blake confirmed grimly. "Not quite as dramatic as your 3 dead husbands, but enough to raise eyebrows." "I'm sorry about your brother," she said softly. "I'm sorry about your husbands," he replied, meeting her gaze directly. Piper's expression clouded. "You must wonder, like everyone else. What happened?" he asked, realizing he'd never actually heard her side of the story. She took a deep breath. "My first husband, Thomas, was thrown from his horse 6 months after we married. I was 19. My second, James, fell through ice on a pond while cutting it for the ice house. That was 2 years later." Her voice grew quieter. "And Richard died in his sleep last year. The doctor said it was his heart. Bad luck, not a curse," Blake said firmly. "3 times? Piper shook her head bitterly. "Even I began to wonder. Is that why you came west? To outrun the whispers? To outrun myself, perhaps." She looked away. "I never loved them, you see. Not really. Each marriage was arranged by my father for business advantages. I was convenient." Blake felt a surge of anger at the thought of her being traded like merchandise. "After Richard died, the rumors started that I'd somehow caused their deaths. That I was cursed, or worse, that I'd murdered them for their money." She laughed without humor. "If only they knew. I left Boston with barely enough for the stagecoach fare. And came to teach in a town that barely wanted you," Blake finished. "It was the only offer I received." Apparently, my references as a teacher were stronger than the rumors about my personal misfortune. She straightened her shoulders. "Anyway, I should go. Thank you for agreeing to fix the book." As she turned to leave, Blake called after her. "Piper." She paused at the door. "Would you allow me to escort you to the Founders' Day dance next Saturday?" Her eyes widened with surprise. "You can't be serious." "I'm not known for my sense of humor," he replied. "The whole town will talk." "They already do," he pointed out. "Might as well give them something worth talking about." For a moment, he thought she would refuse. Then a slow smile spread across her face, transforming it completely. "Yes," she said simply. "I'd like that very much." News of Blake's invitation to Piper spread through Silver Creek like wildfire. By the next morning, Millie Anderson was practically bursting into his shop, concern etched on her face. "Blake Holloway, have you lost your senses completely?" Blake continued working the leather he was cutting. "Morning to you too, Millie." "Don't you morning me." The whole town's talking about you taking the cursed widow to the dance. She planted her hands on her hips. Have you forgotten what happened to her husbands? Can't say that I have, Blake replied calmly. Seems to me like she's had more than her share of tragedy. Tragedies she brought on them, Millie insisted. Mark my words, no good will come of this. First Matthew, and now you're courting disaster. Blake's hands stilled, his patience evaporating at the mention of his brother. That's enough, Millie. Miss Sullivan is the schoolteacher, not some witch. And who I escort to the dance is my business alone. Millie drew back, affronted. Well, I was only concerned for your welfare. I appreciate the concern, Blake said, not sounding appreciative at all. But I can manage my own affairs. After Millie huffed her way out of his shop, Blake sat heavily on his stool. He hadn't expected quite such a vehement reaction, though perhaps he should have. Silver Creek had always been suspicious of outsiders, and Piper's reputation made her doubly unwelcome. That evening, Blake delivered the repaired book to the boarding house. Mrs. Parker showed him to the small parlor with obvious reluctance, muttering under her breath about tempting fate. When Piper entered, her face lit up at the sight of the book. You've done a beautiful job, she said, running her fingers over the restored binding. It was worth the effort, Blake replied, watching her. In the lamplight, her features were softer, her eyes luminous. Though I should warn you, my invitation has caused quite a stir. Piper's smile faded. I was afraid of that. Perhaps it would be better if, don't, Blake interrupted. Unless you truly don't wish to go, don't let their gossip decide for us. She studied him for a long moment. Why are you doing this, Blake? You hardly know me. I know enough, he said simply. I know you're kind to children who were strangers to you. I know you face down rumors with dignity. And I know that when you smile, really smile, it's like watching the sun rise over the prairie. Color rose in her cheeks. You shouldn't say such things. Probably not, he agreed. But I've never been good at holding my tongue. So I've heard, she said with a hint of her dry humor. The troublemaking saddle maker. We make quite a pair, Blake said, smiling. The cursed widow and the Indian sympathizer. For a moment, they simply looked at each other, a current of understanding passing between them. I should go, Blake said finally. But I'll call for you Saturday at 7. Piper nodded. I'll be ready. The night of the Founders' Day dance arrived with all the anticipation of a brewing storm. Blake dressed in his best clothes, not formal by Eastern standards, but respectable for Silver Creek. He'd even trimmed his beard and slicked back his unruly brown hair. When Piper opened the boarding house door, Blake felt as though the air had been knocked from his lungs. She wore a dress of deep burgundy, simpler than what the other women would wear but elegant in its restraint. Her dark hair was arranged in soft curls that framed her face. You look beautiful, he said, finding his voice. Thank you. She stepped onto the porch, accepting his offered arm. Your haircut suits you. Thought I should make an effort, he admitted. Ready to scandalize the entire town? She laughed, the sound light and genuine. As I'll ever be. The town hall had been transformed for the occasion, with paper lanterns strung from the rafters and tables laden with food around the perimeter. A small band played in the corner, and several couples already moved across the dance floor. When Blake and Piper entered, a momentary hush fell over the room before conversation resumed at a more frantic pitch. Blake felt Piper tense beside him but was impressed when she kept her head high, smiling politely at anyone who met her gaze. Mayor Jenkins approached them, his expression a mixture of disapproval and resignation. Holloway. Miss Sullivan. Glad you could join us this evening. Wouldn't miss it, Mayor, Blake replied easily. The hall looks fine. Yes, well, the ladies' auxiliary outdid themselves this year. Jenkins cleared his throat. Miss Sullivan, I must say the school board is pleased with your progress. Attendance is better than we expected. Piper nodded graciously. The children are eager to learn. I'm merely providing the opportunity. Before the conversation could continue, the band struck up a lively tune. Blake turned to Piper. "May I have this dance?" Her eyes sparkled with mischief. "I believe that's why we're here, Mr. Holloway." As Blake led her onto the dance floor, he was acutely aware of the stares following them. But when he took Piper in his arms and they began to move with the music, the rest of the room seemed to fade away. She was light on her feet, following his lead effortlessly. "You dance well for a saddle maker," she observed. "My mother's doing," he explained. "She insisted Matthew and I learn proper dancing. Said no son of hers would embarrass himself at social gatherings. She sounds formidable." "She was," Blake said softly. "Lost her to fever when I was 16. Matthew was 14. Piper's expression softened. "And your father?" "Died in a mining accident 3 years later. It was just Matthew and me after that." Blake twirled her gently. "What about your family?" "My father is a banker in Boston. Very proper, very concerned with appearances." Her lips tightened. "My mother died when I was young. I have an older brother who followed in father's footsteps. We're not close." "Is that why you agreed to the marriages?" Blake asked carefully. Piper nodded. "Father arranged them. I was raised to be obedient, to understand that my purpose was to make an advantageous match." Her voice turned bitter. "Though after the third husband died, even father had to admit I might not be marriage material after all." Blake's arm tightened around her waist. "Their deaths weren't your fault." "Perhaps not directly," she agreed. "But sometimes I wonder if my lack of love for them somehow—" She broke off, shaking her head. "It's foolish." "It's not," Blake assured her. "Grief makes us think strange thoughts." As they continued dancing, Blake noticed that a few other couples had drifted closer, perhaps curious about the infamous pair. By the third dance, some of the initial tension in the room had eased, though plenty of suspicious glances still came their way. During a break in the music, Blake fetched them both cups of punch. As they stood near the edge of the room, Sheriff Turner approached, his weathered face unreadable. "Evening, Blake," he nodded. "Miss Sullivan." "Sheriff," they replied in unison. Turner scratched his graying beard. "Just wanted to say it's good to see folks enjoying themselves. My Lucy's been singing your praises, Miss Sullivan. Says you've got a way with numbers she's never seen." Piper's surprise was evident. "Lucy is one of my brightest students. You should be very proud." "I am," Turner agreed. "And I appreciate how you've handled the reception you've received here. Can't be easy." The simple acknowledgement from such a respected figure seemed to shift something in the room. Blake noticed several people watching the exchange with interest. "Thank you, Sheriff," Piper said quietly. As Turner moved away, Piper looked at Blake with wonder. "Did that just happen?" "Progress," Blake said with a small smile. "Small steps." The rest of the evening passed more pleasantly than either of them could have expected. While some townsfolk still kept their distance, others followed the sheriff's lead, approaching Piper with cautious conversation. By the time Blake escorted her back to the boarding house, her step was lighter, her eyes bright with something that looked like hope. On the porch, she turned to him. "Thank you for tonight. It was unexpected." "The whole town talking about us?" Blake teased. "No, that was entirely expected," she replied with a laugh. "I meant the way some of them seemed to thaw, I suppose. People can surprise you," Blake said. "Sometimes in good ways." They stood in silence for a moment, the night air cool around them. Blake wanted to kiss her but sensed it was too soon, the fragile trust between them still new. "Good night, Piper," he said instead, lifting her hand and pressing his lips to her knuckles. Her fingers tightened around his briefly. "Good night, Blake." As summer gave way to autumn, Blake and Piper's friendship blossomed into something deeper. They established a routine Sunday afternoon walks, occasional suppers at the hotel restaurant, and Blake's regular visits to the schoolhouse to help with repairs or simply to listen as she read to her students. Gradually, the town's attitude shifted. It wasn't acceptance exactly, but the vicious rumors subsided to cautious observation. Having the sheriff's tacit approval helped, as did the continued enthusiasm of the students for their teacher. By early October, Blake found himself thinking about Piper in ways that both excited and terrified him. He hadn't allowed himself to care this deeply for anyone since Matthew's death, afraid of losing someone else he loved. And yet Piper had somehow slipped past his defenses. One crisp Saturday morning, Blake invited Piper for a ride into the hills to see the changing leaves. They rode side by side, Piper handling her borrowed mare with surprising skill. "You ride well," Blake observed as they followed a trail up into the foothills. "One of the few advantages of my upbringing," she replied. "Father insisted I learn. Said it was expected of a lady of quality." Blake chuckled. "Can't imagine you were an easy student." "Why do you say that?" she asked, looking genuinely curious. "You've got a stubborn streak a mile wide," he said fondly. "I've seen it when you're teaching. You never give up on a child, even when they're struggling." Piper's expression softened. "Children deserve patience. They're not to blame for what they don't yet understand." They reached a small clearing that overlooked the valley, the town of Silver Creek visible in the distance. The aspen trees around them had turned golden, their leaves shimmering in the breeze. Blake helped Piper dismount, his hands lingering at her waist longer than necessary. They spread a blanket under a large oak tree and shared the lunch Blake had packed: fresh bread, cheese, and apples from the Andersons' orchard. As they ate, Blake found himself watching Piper, the way the dappled sunlight played across her features, how her eyes crinkled when she smiled. She'd changed since her arrival in Silver Creek. The wariness that had shadowed her gaze had diminished, replaced by a quiet confidence. "What are you thinking about so seriously?" she asked, catching him staring. "You," he answered honestly. "How different you seem from the woman who stepped off that stagecoach." Piper brushed crumbs from her skirt, considering. "I feel different. For the first time in my life, I'm making my own choices. Building something that matters." She looked at him. "And I have a friend who sees me, not just the rumors that follow me." "I'd like to be more than your friend, Piper," Blake said, the words escaping before he could reconsider. Her eyes widened, a flush spreading across her cheeks. "Blake, I know it's soon," he continued, committed now. "And I know your history makes you cautious. But I need you to know how I feel." Piper's hands twisted in her lap. "People will say you're tempting fate. That my curse will claim you too." "Let them talk," Blake said firmly. "I stopped believing in curses a long time ago. But 3 husbands, Blake. All dead." Her voice caught. "What if there is something wrong with me? Something I carry without knowing?" Blake reached for her hand, enfolding it in his. "Do you know what I see when I look at you? A woman of extraordinary strength. Someone who's faced tragedy and gossip and still meets each day with grace. Someone who treats children with kindness and patience." He squeezed her fingers. "That's not a curse, Piper. That's a blessing." Tears gathered in her eyes. "I'm afraid," she whispered, "of what people will say." She shook her head slowly. "Of caring for you. Of what might happen if I do." Blake moved closer, raising a hand to brush a tear from her cheek. "Some things are worth the risk." When he kissed her, it was gentle at first, a question more than a demand. But when Piper's arms slid around his neck, the kiss deepened, years of loneliness dissolving in the warmth between them. When they finally broke apart, both breathless, Piper rested her forehead against his. "The town will be scandalized all over again." Blake laughed softly. "Then we'd better give them something worth talking about." News of Blake and Piper's courtship, for that was what it undeniably became, revived the whispers around town. Some, like Millie Anderson, predicted doom. Others, like Sheriff Turner, merely shrugged and commented that a man was entitled to choose his own path, curse or no curse. As October turned to November, Blake found himself falling more deeply in love with Piper. Her quiet strength, her dedication to her students, The way her serious demeanor would occasionally break into unexpected humor, all of it captivated him. They spent evenings by the fire in his small house behind the saddle shop, talking about books, or their childhoods, or their dreams for the future. One evening, as the first snow of winter dusted Silver Creek, Blake built a fire and prepared a simple supper while Piper corrected her students' arithmetic exercises at his kitchen table. "Bobby Jenkins is finally understanding long division," she said, marking a paper with evident satisfaction. "Mayor must be pleased," Blake commented, stirring the stew he'd prepared. "He actually thanked me yesterday," Piper said, sounding surprised. "Said Bobby's talking about wanting to study engineering someday." Blake smiled. "You're changing minds one student at a time." "Perhaps," she agreed. "Though I think you've helped more than you know." "How so?" Piper set down her pencil. "Your standing by me gave others permission to do the same. When the most respected saddle maker in the territory publicly courts the cursed widow, it makes people reconsider their assumptions." Blake brought bowls of stew to the table. "I didn't do it to change minds." "I know," she said softly, reaching for his hand. "You did it because you're a good man who makes his own judgments." After supper, they sat before the fire, Piper leaning against Blake's chest as he read aloud from a collection of Whitman's poetry. The intimacy of the moment, her warmth against him, the rhythm of her breathing, the soft scent of her hair filled Blake with a contentment he never expected to find again after losing his family. "Piper," he said, setting the book aside. She tilted her head to look at him. "Will you marry me?" She sat up abruptly, turning to face him. "Blake, you can't, I can," he interrupted. "And I am. I love you, Piper Sullivan. I want to build a life with you. But the rumors have been there for months and will be there regardless." He took her hands in his. "I don't care what people say. I care about waking up beside you, growing old with you." Tears filled her eyes. "And if something happens to you?" "If the curse, there is no curse," Blake said firmly. "Only life, with all its joys and sorrows. I'd rather have whatever time we're given together than live safely apart." Piper studied his face, searching for any hint of doubt. Finding none, she took a deep breath. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, I'll marry you." Blake gathered her into his arms, his heart fuller than he thought possible. As he held her, he silently promised that he would prove to her and to Silver Creek that love was stronger than superstition. They decided on a small wedding in early December, before the winter weather made travel difficult. Despite Blake's insistence that they didn't need the town's blessing, he was pleasantly surprised when Mayor Jenkins agreed to perform the ceremony and offered the town hall as a venue. "People are coming around," Sheriff Turner told Blake a week before the wedding. "Miss Sullivan's done right by our children. And folks respect a man who stands by his convictions." He chuckled. "Though Millie Anderson is still convinced you'll be dead by spring." Blake rolled his eyes. "Millie would find a dark cloud in paradise." The day before the wedding, Blake was putting the finishing touches on a special gift for Piper when the shop door burst open. Brody Carter, one of the local ranch hands, stumbled in, his face ashen. "Blake! You gotta come quick. There's been an accident at the school." Blake's heart seized. "Piper?" "She's with the doc now," Brody said, still catching his breath. Roof beam gave way. She pushed some kids clear but couldn't get out of the way herself. Blake was already grabbing his coat. "How bad?" "Don't know. She was unconscious when they carried her out." Blake ran the entire way to Doc Wilson's office, horrible scenarios playing through his mind. When he burst through the door, Mrs. Wilson directed him to a back room where Piper lay on an examination table, her face pale but her eyes open. "Blake," she whispered, reaching for him. He was at her side instantly, taking her hand. "What happened? Are you all right?" Doc Wilson answered from where he was wrapping Piper's ankle. "Sprained ankle and a nasty bump on the head. She'll have quite a headache, but she's lucky it wasn't worse." "The children?" Piper asked anxiously. "All fine, thanks to you." the doctor assured her. Though Tommy Baker's mother is beside herself with gratitude. Says you pushed him out of the way just before the beam fell. Blake pressed Piper's hand to his lips. You scared me half to death. I'm sorry, she said, wincing as she tried to sit up. I heard the wood creaking and just reacted. You're a hero, Blake told her. Though I'd appreciate it if you'd be a little less heroic in the future. My heart can't take it. Doc Wilson finished with the bandage and straightened. She needs rest. That head injury isn't severe, but concussions are nothing to trifle with. He looked at Blake. I assume the wedding is postponed? No, Piper said firmly, before Blake could respond. We're getting married tomorrow as planned. Piper, your health is more important, Blake began. I'm not starting our marriage by giving the gossips more fuel, she interrupted. They'll say it's the curse acting already, that we tempted fate. Her eyes held his. We're getting married tomorrow, Blake Holloway, even if you have to carry me down the aisle. Doc Wilson chuckled. Well, I can't argue with that kind of determination. But you'll need to stay off that ankle for at least a week afterward. I'll see to it, Blake promised, already imagining Piper's frustration at being confined to bed. That evening, after settling Piper at the boarding house with strict instructions to rest, Blake returned to his shop to finish her wedding gift. As he worked into the night, he couldn't shake the fear that had gripped him when he'd heard about the accident. For the first time, he understood a little of what Piper must feel, the dread that something might happen to someone you love, that happiness might be snatched away in an instant. By morning, however, his resolve had returned. They would face whatever came together, curse or no curse. The wedding took place as scheduled, though with some adjustments. Instead of walking down the aisle, Piper was carried to the altar by Blake, causing a ripple of murmurs and a few chuckles among the surprisingly large crowd that gathered. Her simple cream-colored dress was complemented by a crown of winter greenery in her dark hair, and despite the bandage visible beneath her hem, she radiated happiness. Mayor Jenkins performed a brief but heartfelt ceremony. When he pronounced them husband and wife, Blake kissed Piper with a tenderness that brought tears to more than a few eyes, including, to everyone's shock, Millie Anderson's. The celebration afterward was modest but joyful. To Blake's amazement, nearly the entire town attended, many bringing dishes to share or small gifts for the newlyweds. Even those who had been most vocal about the curse seemed willing to set aside their concerns for the day. Never thought I'd see this, Sheriff Turner commented, clapping Blake on the shoulder. Whole town celebrating the Black Widow's fourth marriage. Blake winced at the nickname. Don't let Piper hear you call her that. Wouldn't dream of it, Turner assured him. Besides, seems to me she's shed that skin, thanks to you. Later, as Blake carried his bride across the threshold of their home, Piper laughed with genuine delight. I don't think this is quite how you imagined our wedding night. I imagined you as my wife, Blake replied, setting her carefully on their bed. The details are negotiable. He presented her with his wedding gift, then a beautifully crafted leather-bound journal with her new initials, Ph, embossed on the cover. For your thoughts, your lesson plans, your dreams, he explained. Whatever you wish to fill it with. Piper traced the letters reverently. It's beautiful, Blake. Like its owner, he said, sitting beside her. I have something else for you, too. From his pocket, he withdrew a simple gold locket. Inside was a small photograph of the two of them that Sheriff Turner's wife had taken a few weeks earlier. So even when we're apart, you'll have a reminder that you're loved, Blake explained as he fastened it around her neck. Piper touched the locket, tears shining in her eyes. I never thought I'd have this, she admitted. Real love, freely given. Blake gathered her in his arms, mindful of her injuries. Get used to it, Mrs. Holloway. You'll be receiving it every day for the rest of our lives. The winter of 1876-1877 was harsh, with heavy snowfall and bitter cold that kept much of Silver Creek homebound for weeks at a time. For Blake and Piper, however, it was a time of profound happiness. The forced confinement of Piper's recovery, and the weather gave them time to grow together as husband and wife, to learn each other's habits and histories, to build the foundation of their marriage away from curious eyes. By the time the snow began to melt in late February, Piper's ankle had healed completely. The schoolhouse roof had been properly repaired, and she was eager to return to teaching. Blake watched with pride as she threw herself back into her work, her passion for education undiminished by her accident. Spring brought new beginnings in more ways than one. On a warm April morning, Piper came to Blake's shop, her face glowing with barely contained excitement. "Blake," she said, closing the door behind her. "I have news." He set down his tools, recognizing something significant in her tone. "What is it?" "I'm going to have a baby," she said, her voice filled with wonder. "Doc Wilson confirmed it this morning." Blake stood frozen for a moment, joy and fear warring within him. Then he crossed the room in 3 strides and swept Piper into a gentle embrace. "A baby," he repeated, his voice thick with emotion. "Are you happy?" she asked, searching his face. "Happier than I've ever been," he assured her, kissing her softly. "Though a little terrified as well." Piper laughed. "That makes 2 of us." As news of Piper's pregnancy spread through Silver Creek, Blake noticed a curious thing. Instead of reviving whispers about curses, the announcement seemed to cement Piper's acceptance in the community. Women who had once avoided her now stopped to offer advice or share stories of their own childbearing experiences. Several mothers of her students organized to ensure the schoolhouse would be properly cleaned and maintained during her eventual confinement. Even Millie Anderson, the most persistent of the gossips, brought a basket of baby clothes she had knitted herself. "These were meant for my grandbaby in Denver," she told Piper somewhat gruffly. "But they sent word they won't be needing them after all. No sense letting good will go to waste." It was as close to a blessing as Millie was likely to give, and Piper accepted it with gracious thanks. As summer approached and Piper's condition became more visible, Blake found himself growing increasingly protective. He insisted on walking her to and from the schoolhouse each day, made sure she rested adequately, and even expanded their small house to include a proper nursery. "You're hovering," Piper accused him one evening as he adjusted a pillow behind her back for the 3rd time. "I'm caring for my wife and child," Blake corrected. Piper caught his hand. "Blake, look at me." When he met her gaze, she continued gently, "I'm not going to break." "Women have been having babies since the beginning of time." "I know." He sighed, sitting beside her. I couldn't bear it if anything happened to you. To either of you." Understanding softened her expression. "You're thinking about the curse again." "No," he denied, then relented. "Maybe a little. Not because I believe in it, but because I've already lost everyone I loved once before. The thought of losing you." "Blake Holloway," Piper said firmly, placing his hand on her rounded belly where their child kicked vigorously. "Feel that? That's life, not death. That's our future." Her eyes held his. "I'm not going anywhere." As if to emphasize her point, the baby kicked again, bringing a reluctant smile to Blake's face. "Your mother is very persuasive," he told the bump. "I think she'll make an excellent lawyer if she ever tires of teaching." Piper laughed, the tension broken. "I'll stick with molding young minds, thank you very much." On a sweltering August morning, Piper went into labor. Blake sent for Doc Wilson and Mrs. Turner, who had offered to assist with the birth. Then began the longest day of Blake's life, pacing outside their bedroom as Piper's cries occasionally pierced the closed door. Sheriff Turner appeared mid-afternoon, ostensibly to deliver a message but clearly to provide moral support. "First one's always the hardest," he told Blake, handing him a flask. "Take a sip. Steadies the nerves." Blake accepted gratefully. "How did you manage it? With Mrs. Turner?" "Poorly," Turner admitted with a chuckle. "Fainted dead away when I heard the baby's first cry. Never lived it down, either." As evening approached, Blake's worry deepened. Surely it shouldn't take this long? Just as he was about to demand answers from the doctor, A new sound broke the tension, the thin, outraged wail of a newborn. Blake froze, his heart pounding. A few minutes later, the door opened, and Mrs. Turner emerged, her face tired but smiling. "Congratulations, Mr. Holloway," she said. "You have a daughter. And your wife is asking for you." Blake entered the bedroom on unsteady legs. Piper lay propped against pillows, her face pale and exhausted but radiant as she cradled a small bundle. When she looked up and saw him, her smile was like sunrise. "Come meet your daughter," she whispered. Blake approached the bed cautiously, overcome with emotion as he gazed down at the tiny, red-faced infant. She had a shock of dark hair and Blake's cleft chin. "She's perfect," he managed, his voice breaking. "Would you like to hold her?" Piper asked. With trembling hands, Blake took his daughter, marveling at how small she was, how complete. "Hello, little one," he murmured. "I'm your pa." As if in response, the baby's eyes opened briefly, revealing a glimpse of blue before closing again contentedly. "What shall we name her?" Piper asked. Blake considered for a moment. "What about Madeline? After my mother?" Piper's eyes softened. "Madeline Holloway. It's beautiful." She touched the baby's cheek gently. "Welcome to the world, Madeline. You're already the miracle of our lives." News of Madeline's birth rippled through Silver Creek, bringing a steady stream of visitors bearing gifts and good wishes. Even Mayor Jenkins and his wife came to pay their respects, bringing a silver rattle that had belonged to their son. "Fine-looking child," Jenkins commented, peering at the sleeping infant. "Has your chin, Holloway." "And her mother's spirit, God help us all," Blake replied with a proud smile. As autumn painted the hills in gold and crimson, Blake marveled at how completely his life had changed in just over a year. From the solitary existence he'd led after Matthew's death to this, a home filled with love, a wife who challenged and supported him, and a daughter whose every new expression and sound seemed miraculous. One evening, as Piper nursed Madeline by the fire, Blake found himself watching them with a fullness in his heart that almost hurt. "What are you thinking?" Piper asked, catching his gaze. "That I'm the luckiest man in the territory," he answered honestly. "That when you stepped off that stagecoach, I had no idea you'd become the center of my world." Piper's eyes grew thoughtful. "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if you'd listened to the gossip? If you'd stayed away from the cursed widow?" "Never," Blake said firmly. "Best decision I ever made was ignoring every word of it." He moved to sit beside her, stroking Madeline's downy head. "Though I do wonder sometimes." "About what?" "Whether those other men, your husbands, knew what they had in you. Whether they saw past the obedient daughter to the extraordinary woman beneath." Piper considered this. "I don't think they did. Our marriages were transactions, not partnerships. I was property to be managed, not a person to be loved." She looked down at their daughter. "But perhaps that's why they're gone and you're here. Because you really saw me from the beginning. And fell in love with what I saw." Blake finished, leaning forward to kiss her gently. 3 years later, Silver Creek had grown considerably. The railroad had finally connected the town to Denver, bringing new settlers and businesses. Blake's saddle shop had expanded to include a larger workshop and 2 apprentices. Piper continued teaching, though now with an assistant to help manage the growing number of students. Their family had expanded as well. Madeline, now a precocious 3-year-old with her father's determination and her mother's intelligence, had been joined by a baby brother, Matthew, named for Blake's fallen brother. On a crisp October afternoon, much like the day Blake had proposed, the Holloway family gathered in the town cemetery. It was the anniversary of Blake's brother's death at Little Bighorn, and they had come to pay their respects at the memorial stone Blake had erected. "Was Uncle Matthew big like you, Papa?" Madeline asked, placing a small bunch of wildflowers at the base of the stone. "Not quite as tall," Blake answered, holding baby Matthew in one arm while his other hand rested on his daughter's shoulder. "But he had a bigger heart than anyone I've ever known. He would have loved you both very much." Piper stood beside them, Her hand slipped through Blake's elbow. Your father tells me he was very brave, she added. Like you, Madeline? The little girl beamed at the comparison. Is he an angel now? I believe he is, Blake said softly, watching over all of us. As they walked back toward town, Madeline skipping ahead to chase fallen leaves, Piper leaned into Blake's side. She's going to be heartbroken when school starts tomorrow, and she can't attend. Blake chuckled. Another year, love? She's not quite ready, no matter what she thinks. She's ready, Piper contradicted with a smile. It's her poor teacher who isn't prepared for Hurricane Madeline. They paused on the hill overlooking Silver Creek, taking in the sight of the growing town spread below them. From this distance, they could see their home, the schoolhouse, Blake's shop, all the landmarks of the life they built together. Do you ever think about it? Blake asked suddenly. The curse? Piper considered the question. Not often anymore. It's hard to believe in curses when surrounded by so many blessings. She looked up at him. Though Mrs. Parker did remind me last week that you've now outlived all my previous husbands combined. Blake laughed. I plan to outlive them by decades more, if you don't mind. I don't mind at all, Piper assured him, rising on tiptoe to kiss his cheek. In fact, I'm counting on it. As they continued down the hill, baby Matthew sleeping contentedly against Blake's shoulder and Madeline running back to take her mother's hand, Blake reflected on the strange twists of fate that had brought them all together. A woman stepping off a stagecoach with rumors trailing behind her like shadows. A man who had lost too much to fear gossip. And the love that had transformed them both. The cursed widow had indeed become the miracle of his life, not through any supernatural power, but through the everyday magic of love freely given and gratefully received. And if the townspeople of Silver Creek now told a different story about Piper Holloway, one of courage and devotion, of second chances and new beginnings, well, that was a kind of miracle too. As they reached the edge of town, Madeline looked up at her parents with bright eyes. Mrs. Turner says I'm going to have another baby brother or sister soon. Is that true? Blake nearly stumbled, his gaze flying to Piper's face. Her cheeks flushed, but her eyes danced with mischief. I was going to tell you tonight, she admitted. Mrs. Turner guessed when I was feeling ill at the church social last week. Another baby, Blake said, his voice filled with wonder as he pulled her close, mindful of Matthew between them. Our family grows. So does the miracle, Piper whispered, standing on tiptoe to kiss him properly, heedless of who might see. And as the autumn sun cast long shadows across Silver Creek, the Holloway family walked home together, living proof that love was stronger than superstition, that happiness could grow from the rocky soil of heartache, and that sometimes the greatest miracles were the ones you built with your own hands, one day at a time.